What if I told you some of the biggest names in NFL history weren't just suspended, they were erased? No goodbye games, no retirement speeches, no second chances, just gone. Players who were once unstoppable, Super Bowl quarterbacks, Pro Bowl stars, generational talents, vanished from the league like they never existed. Not because they couldn't play, but because of decisions, mistakes, systems, and moments the NFL didn't want to explain. Some were punished, some were made examples, and some were quietly blackballed. This isn't just about suspensions. This is about careers that ended in silence, stories the league doesn't talk about, and players who crossed a line you're not supposed to see. From Colin Kaepernick to Aaron Hernandez to stories even darker than you remember, these are the players the NFL erased. There was never a press release. There was never a breaking headline that said, Colin Kaepernick is banned from the NFL. He never failed a drug test. He never got arrested. He was never suspended for violence. He never did anything that normally gets a player thrown out of the league. He just took a knee. And then slowly, quietly, he disappeared. Let's rewind. In 2016, Colin Kaepernick was the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. At that point, he was already one of the most recognizable players in football. He had taken his team to a Super Bowl. He had taken them to an NFC championship game. He was still young, still athletic, still mobile, and still more accomplished than a huge number of quarterbacks around the league. That season, Kaepernick made a decision that would change everything. During the national anthem, instead of standing, he knelt. He didn't do it to go viral. He didn't do it for attention. He didn't do it to insult the military. He did it as a quiet protest against police brutality and racial injustice in America. It was deliberate. It was peaceful. It was symbolic. But once the cameras caught it, the story stopped being about football. Overnight, the discussion changed. It was no longer about his arm talent, his legs, his record, or whether he could still start in the NFL. Now it was about politics. Fans burned jerseys. Sports talk shows exploded. Television hosts ranted for days. Politicians jumped in. Everybody had an opinion, and the NFL, more than anything, looked terrified, because this was bigger than football now. At the end of that season, Kaepernick opted out of his contract, and from his point of view, that probably made sense. He was only 29 years old, he was healthy, he was experienced, he had playoff success on his resume, he had been to the Super Bowl. In a league where quarterbacks are always in demand, he had every reason to believe somebody would sign him. But nobody did. Not in 2017, not in 2018, not ever. He kept training. He stayed in shape, he continued preparing like an NFL quarterback waiting for a call, and yet the call never came.
Josh Gordon didn't get banned in one dramatic moment. There was no one incident that instantly ended everything. He didn't commit some headline-grabbing crime. He didn't attack a teammate. He didn't get caught throwing games. He didn't become a public villain overnight. What Josh Gordon did was struggle with addiction. And the league treated that struggle like a repeated offense instead of a deep personal crisis. Let's go back. In 2013, Josh Gordon was just 22 years old and playing for the Cleveland Browns, a franchise that at that time had almost no offensive identity and very little stability. The quarterbacks throwing him the ball were Brandon Weeden, Jason Campbell, and Brian Hoyer. For most wide receivers, that kind of instability would make a breakout season nearly impossible. But not Josh Gordon. He was unstoppable. That year, Gordon led the entire NFL in receiving yards with 1,646 yards, and he did it in just 14 games. Think about that. He missed 2 games and still outgained everyone. He looked like one of the most gifted receivers in football. Big, fast, explosive, smooth, dominant at every level of the field. For a brief moment, he looked like the future of the position. But those 2 missed games weren't random. He had already been suspended for violating the NFL's substance abuse policy, specifically for marijuana. From the outside, maybe it looked like a small issue. Maybe it looked like a young player making a mistake. Maybe it looked temporary. But behind the scenes, Josh Gordon was dealing with much more than one bad decision. Later, he would reveal just how deep the struggle went. He had been drinking heavily and using multiple substances going back to college. By the time he entered the NFL, he wasn't just partying, he was self-medicating. He was dealing with pain and internal issues that were much bigger than football. And this is where the story gets darker, because instead of meeting that reality with meaningful help, the NFL mostly met it with punishment. Fail a test? Suspended. Fail another? Longer suspension. One more violation? The hammer comes down even harder. The structure was rigid. The response was cold. There was very little room for understanding addiction as addiction. In 2014, Gordon was suspended again. In 2015, he was suspended for the full season. And just like that, one of the most talented receivers in football became a player people only talked about in terms of what could have been. Then came 2017. He returned, he played 5 games, and in those flashes, people saw it again. The talent was still there, the movement was still there, the size, the speed, the ability, it was all still visible. For a moment, the football world started to wonder, maybe this is it, maybe Josh Gordon is finally back for real. But then came another test, another violation, another indefinite suspension. And that became the cycle. Not because he lacked talent, not because he stopped working, not because he stopped trying. Josh Gordon was never known as someone out of shape.
Before 2014, Ray Rice looked like the kind of player any league would proudly promote. He was a 3-time Pro Bowler, a Super Bowl champion, the face of the Baltimore Ravens offense, a compact, powerful running back who seemed to represent toughness, reliability, and professionalism. On the field, he was everything teams wanted. And off the field, at least publicly, he carried the image of a model NFL citizen. Then came the elevator, and with it, one of the most devastating turning points in modern NFL history. Security footage surfaced from an Atlantic City casino elevator. In that footage, Ray Rice and his then-fiancée, Janae Palmer, were involved in an altercation. At first, the public did not see the full incident. They only saw the aftermath. They saw Rice dragging her unconscious body out of the elevator. That alone was horrifying, and yet the NFL's response was shockingly light. Rice was suspended for just 2 games. 2 games. That punishment immediately triggered outrage. Media members, fans, former players, people across the sports world looked at the suspension and asked the same question. That's it? In a league where players had sometimes received heavier punishment for far less serious conduct, 2 games felt absurd. It felt insulting. It felt like the NFL was either clueless, indifferent, or both. But the league stood by the punishment. They said they didn't have every fact. They said they were following process. They suggested this was a responsible decision based on the information they had. Then the full video came out, and everything changed. Now the public could see Ray Rice punching Janae Palmer inside the elevator. Suddenly, the outrage intensified beyond control. The Ravens cut him. The NFL suspended him indefinitely. And just like that, Ray Rice was gone. Ricky Williams is one of the most misunderstood stars in NFL history. A lot of people remember him through a lazy, simplified joke, the great running back who walked away from football because of weed. But that version of the story leaves out almost everything that actually mattered. Ricky Williams was not a bust. He was not some flaky talent who never produced. He was a Heisman Trophy winner, a top 5 draft pick, an elite runner with real power, real speed, and real production. Coming out of college, he was viewed as one of the biggest running back prospects in years, the kind of player franchises dream about building around. In 1999, the New Orleans Saints gave up an astonishing package of draft capital to get him, an entire draft class worth of value, essentially, for one player. That tells you everything about how highly he was regarded. And from the beginning, the pressure was enormous. Ricky wasn't naturally comfortable with fame. He didn't fit the media's idea of a star. He wasn't always smiling in interviews. He sometimes wore his helmet during media sessions. People called him strange. People mocked him. People misunderstood him. What many didn't understand then was that Ricky Williams was dealing with severe anxiety and emotional isolation, and he was doing it in an era that offered very little empathy for that kind of struggle. On the field, though, he was excellent. He played better than a lot of people remember. He made the Pro Bowl. He led the league in carries. After being traded to the Miami Dolphins, he rushed for 1,853 yards in 2002. That is not the resume of a disappointment. That is the resume of an elite running back. But off the field, Ricky was unraveling. He failed multiple drug tests for marijuana, and at that time, the NFL's policy was blunt and unforgiving. A positive test didn't lead to nuance or context, it led to punishment, mandatory suspension, no flexibility, no real public understanding, no meaningful effort to separate recreational behavior, anxiety management, and deeper mental health realities. And Ricky never really hid from it. He spoke openly about using marijuana to deal with anxiety and the crushing pressure around him. To him, it wasn't rebellion, it wasn't some glamorous act of defiance, it was survival. But the NFL didn't see it that way. The league saw a policy violation. Ricky saw an attempt to function. And eventually, the pressure became too much. In 2004, after another failed test, Ricky Williams walked away from football. He said he was done. And the reaction was brutal. In 2021, the NFL relaxed its marijuana policy significantly. Suspensions for weed all but disappeared, except in extreme cases. The same league that hammered Ricky during his prime had now evolved with the times. By then, the world had changed. The conversation around cannabis had changed. The conversation around mental health had changed. Even the business side had changed. The NFL that once punished Ricky harshly now existed in a culture where CBD partnerships and mental wellness language had become mainstream. So when you look back, the question becomes unavoidable. Was Ricky Williams banned? Yes, multiple times. But more than that, he was punished for being too early. Too early for a league that didn't understand anxiety. Too early for a culture that mocked emotional vulnerability. Too early for a system that saw coping as misconduct. If Ricky Williams played in a later era, he might have been celebrated as a mental health pioneer. In his own era, he became a punchline first and a misunderstood trailblazer only years later. Calvin Ridley didn't throw a game. He didn't manipulate a result. He didn't influence a score. He wasn't even on the field. And yet, the NFL gave him one of the harshest gambling punishments in recent memory. To understand why his suspension became such a huge story, you have to start with the timing. In 2021, Ridley stepped away from the Atlanta Falcons during the season. He cited mental health struggles, depression, anxiety, burnout, emotional strain. Publicly, the Falcons supported him. Fans largely supported him too. At first, it looked like a sign that the NFL world was finally learning how to talk about emotional wellness in a more serious way. Ridley was away from the team, away from the field, away from active competition, and during that period, he placed bets on NFL games through a sports betting app. The total amount was reported to be $1,500. One of the key details was that the parlay included the Falcons to win. There was no allegation that he bet against his own team. There was no evidence that he tried to sabotage anything. There was no claim that he had manipulated outcomes. And still, the NFL came down hard. Ridley was suspended for at least one full season. That meant he missed all of 2022. It also meant he lost millions, about $11 million in salary. Before Calvin Ridley, before sportsbook logos became normal, and long before gambling partnerships became part of the NFL's image, there was Art Schlichter. And if Ridley's story represented hypocrisy in the modern era, Schlichter's story represented something much darker: full collapse. Art Schlichter was supposed to be the future. He was a top 5 pick in the 1982 NFL Draft,
a quarterback out of Ohio State with a strong arm, a big frame, and the kind of college resume that made franchises believe they were drafting a cornerstone. The Indianapolis Colts thought they had found their next franchise quarterback. But Schlichter entered the NFL carrying a secret that would destroy everything. He had a gambling addiction. Not a casual habit, not an occasional bad decision, a full-blown, destructive addiction. And it spiraled fast. During his rookie season, Schlichter reportedly gambled constantly, not just on sports, but on horse racing, blackjack, casino games, and almost anything else that involved action. He was losing massive amounts of money almost immediately. Within months of signing his rookie contract, reports suggested he had already blown through hundreds of thousands of dollars. To keep feeding the addiction, he borrowed money from teammates, he borrowed from friends, he lied to coaches, he wrote bad checks, he kept digging deeper. And eventually, the line that can never be crossed in professional football was crossed. Gambling on NFL games, including games involving teams he was connected to. That is the ultimate nightmare for a league built on competitive trust. The NFL found out, and in 1983, Schlichter was suspended. He missed the entire season. Eventually, he was reinstated, and he returned briefly, but the damage was already catastrophic. He never regained control of his career. Across his NFL run, he appeared in only 13 games. For a player drafted to become a franchise quarterback, that's not just disappointment, that's devastation. By the mid-1980s, he was effectively finished in the league. But the saddest part is that football wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning of the collapse. After leaving the NFL, Art Schlichter kept gambling. The addiction didn't stop because the career ended. If anything, it kept pulling him further down. In 2012, the Jacksonville Jaguars were desperate for a star. So when Justin Blackmon fell to them with the 5th overall pick, it felt like a miracle. This wasn't just another receiver. This was a 2-time Biletnikoff Award winner, a college superstar, a 1,500-yard machine at Oklahoma State. He had size, he had strength, he had hands, he had dominance. To many scouts, he looked like the next great wide receiver, someone who could take over games and anchor an offense for years. And early on, it seemed like that projection might actually come true. Even on a struggling Jaguars team with unstable quarterback play, Blackmon showed flashes of brilliance. In his rookie season, he put up 865 yards, impressive numbers considering the situation around him. Then came Week 11. 236 yards in a single game, as a rookie, on a bad team, with average quarterback play. That kind of performance doesn't happen by accident. That's what elite talent looks like when it breaks through. But behind the scenes, everything was already starting to crack. Before he even played his first NFL snap, Blackmon had been arrested for DUI during the offseason. Not once, twice. The league didn't immediately shut him down, but the warning signs were there. Then came 2013. He was suspended for 4 games for violating the league's substance abuse policy. The details weren't fully public, but the message was clear. This wasn't a one-time issue. He returned, and for 2 games, he looked unstoppable again. 19 receptions, 326 yards. It felt like he was about to explode into superstardom. And then, it ended. Another violation, another failed test, another decision. Indefinite suspension. Just like that, the Jaguars lost their franchise receiver. The team never officially cut him right away. Year after year, they repeated the same line. We're supporting him through his personal challenges. But he never came back. Arrests continued, legal trouble followed, and slowly, Justin Blackmon disappeared from football. Long before modern gambling controversies, long before betting apps, sponsorship deals, and commercials, there was a scandal that threatened the foundation of the NFL itself. Paul Hornung and Alex Karras. These weren't fringe players, these were stars. Paul Hornung was the golden boy of the Green Bay Packers, a Heisman Trophy winner, a versatile weapon who could run, pass, and kick. one of Vince Lombardi's most trusted players. Alex Karras was a dominant defensive tackle for the Detroit Lions, tough, physical, and respected across the league. Both were at the peak of their careers, and both were caught betting on NFL games, including games involving their own teams. That was the ultimate violation, because if fans believe games are influenced by gambling, the entire league collapses. In 1963, Commissioner Pete Rozelle made a decision that shocked everyone. He suspended both players for the entire season. No hesitation, no soft punishment, no exceptions. This wasn't just discipline, this was protection of the league itself. And it worked, because it sent a message that still exists today. Gambling threatens everything. But here's what makes their story different from others. They came back. In 1964, both Hornung and Karras were reinstated. Hornung returned to the Packers and finished his career with another championship. Karras continued playing and later became an actor, building a second career in entertainment. Today, they're remembered as legends, but their suspensions were historic because they set the precedent. They showed that when it comes to gambling, the NFL will always protect the integrity of the game, no matter how big the player is. Some players didn't fall in slow motion. They burned out fast. Pac-Man Jones, suspended multiple times for fights, arrests, strip club incidents, even assaulting an airport employee. And yet somehow he lasted over a decade before the chances finally ran out. David Irving walked away from the NFL mid-suspension on Instagram, frustrated with the league's marijuana policy. Tried to come back later, but by then the NFL had already moved on. Titus Young, a second-round pick with real talent, within 2 years arrested 4 times in a single week, including trying to break into a tow yard to steal his own car. His career ended almost as quickly as it began. Ray Caruth, a first-round pick, convicted of conspiracy to murder the mother of his unborn child, served 18 years in prison. The NFL doesn't revisit that story. And there are many more. Stories that don't make headlines anymore. Careers that ended in silence, names that disappeared. Because in the NFL, being banned isn't always about one rule. Sometimes it's about decisions. Sometimes it's about timing. Sometimes it's about the system. And sometimes it's about a moment that changes everything forever.